Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Heretical Heathen podcast. It is I, the arch heretic, the trollman of Wisconsin, Robert Knox. And this week, we're going to dive into the giants. Every mythology has its monsters, every religion has its baddies, if you will. But if you actually sit down with the Norse cosmology for more than 5 minutes, you'll start to notice that the fairy tale version doesn't always get everything right. The monsters aren't necessarily outside the story. They're not the final boss waiting in Act 3. They're part of the cosmos itself. The reason I chose to do this topic this week was in part due to some of the conversations I'd been having around the giants and the sort of, let's say, wealth and Sean that they take place in. And another reason is my area in Wisconsin has been hammered, and not just my area, outside areas too have just been hammered by some of the worst storms I've ever seen. Now, we get rain here all the time, and in some areas, flooding occurs. Flooding is quite natural for a lot of areas in Wisconsin. That said, I've never seen what's been happening this year. The rain has been so heavy that I've seen footage and videos and know people who had to get new cars because their cars were completely submerged by the storms. Just the other day, I had left my local YMCA and I went to the store to buy something, and the clouds looked a little dark, which was concerning, but I didn't really think too much of it. I went in the store, grabbed 2 items, walked out, and I thought it was hailing. I was being assaulted by something that felt like hail, except it wasn't hail. It was just sand and dirt picked up by some of the most intense winds I have ever seen. And I don't live that far from my local convenience store, so I didn't have that far to drive, but I could barely make it home. I had to turn up the windshield wipers to go as fast as possible, and even then, it was hard to get to where I was going. Hard to make it a few blocks. There's something about the swiftness at which the storm came, prompted thoughts of Thor, and obviously, when you think of Thor, you think of his battle with the giants. And so now that we've gotten here, we should probably talk about, well, what the hell is a giant? Now, if you've ever picked up a book on Norse mythology, if you've ever watched a show, read a comic, played a video game, then you've seen the giants. Thanks to the Marvel Cinematic Universe, everyone is familiar with Tom Hiddleston's Loki. I have an episode on Loki. You can go back and listen to that if you want, and I talk about some of the pitfalls that come with worshiping Loki and maybe why you shouldn't do it. That said, it was one of my earlier episodes, and I missed a lot of the clicks. I have a lot of sniffles. It is very hard to get through, but I think the point stands nonetheless. Anyway, back to the topic at hand. Everyone who has picked up a book on Norse mythology or watched any content knows what the giants are. What comes to mind are these big brutes made of like ice and fire that are fighting the gods in order to destroy the world. And that's partially true. Much like everything in the Germanic world, pinning down what exactly a giant or a troll is rather difficult. Hell, sometimes it's even complicated to figure out exactly what makes one god an Aesir versus a Vanir. These things are sort of in flux. Now, some people will say the Vanir are the more earth-based gods, where the Aesir are the more sky-based, the more warrior-esque gods. But even then, there are some gods in the pantheons, the Aesir or the Vanir, that don't quite fit that conceptual schema. For instance, Mimir. Now, Mimir is often considered an Aesir that was sent to the Vanir and who was later beheaded. But Mimir himself may actually be of Jotun blood. So again, it's not clear where these things begin and where they end. It's not clear how to define these things. Part of the problem is the word Jotun itself. Now, Jotun is often translated as giant, but that's kind of a mistranslation. And it could be the case, and I think Jackson Crawford covers this, where early translators were looking at other myths, such as the Greek myths, and they looked at the Titans as sort of an analogous thing to the Jotun, and they decided because Titans are big, the Jotun must be big too, so we're going to translate it as giant. And this is a terrible translation. The word Jotun itself stems from the Proto-Germanic, and I may butcher this pronunciation, etunaz, which means something closer to eaters or consumers, maybe that which eats, that which consumes, that which devours. We get a sort of flavor of this in some of the sources, such as the Gylfaginning and the Prose Edda, where Thor and Loki travel to Jotunheim, and along the way they meet several giants. But when they finally reach Uthengardr, and again, sorry if I'm butchering these pronunciations, they are challenged by the beings of this place to prove their exceptional skills. And the one that's going to serve our purposes here is an eating contest between Loki and Uthgar Logi. Loki proudly asserts that no one else in the castle in Jotunheim, in this place, could eat as much food or faster than he could. And so Uthgar Logi challenged him to prove himself. And so they entered into contest, and a trough of meat was set before them, with Loki at one end and Logi at the other, and they were to see who could reach the middle first. Now they met in the middle around the same time, but while Loki had eaten all of the meat between the end and the middle point from which they were meeting, Loki had eaten the meat, the bones, and even the trough itself. So Loki had clearly lost. We find out later that Loki is actually fire. This makes a lot of sense with our previous definition. A fire is something that is all-consuming. It will eat and eat and eat, and it will continue to do so until it is put out. This is the spirit of fire giants, and the frost giants are no different. If you go out in the winter and you're not wearing enough protection, the cold will consume. It will slowly consume you, and may start by making you cold, and then eventually you'll get frostbite, and it will keep eating and eating and eating until something stops it. This is the essence of giants. Kind of. We have other examples, such as the aforementioned Mimir, that complicate the issues. It's not clear if Mimir fits this consuming model. That said, he is wise, and he does have a well that stores a lot of wisdom, so maybe there's a sense in which what Mimir does is consume and eat as much wisdom as possible. But even that is a bit of a reach. But there's something in the story that contains an essence that we see elsewhere, and that's an ability for Jotun to move up the chain of being. They're able to become Aesir or Vanir, and Mimir isn't the only one. We see this with Theyre as well. Theyre is the son of a Jotun, named Hymir. This would make him a giant by birth, and yet he is one of the Aesir. In fact, not only is Theyre one of the Aesir, he is one of the most notable Aesir. He is the Aesir, he is the brave one, the courageous one, who's willing to stick his hand into the jaws of the Fenris wolf in order to bind it and make sure that it doesn't destroy Midgard, which it eventually does anyway. You can't outrun your fate, folks. All you can do is face it with bravery. Mimir and Theyre aren't unique cases here. There's also Skadi. Now, Skadi was a Jotun born, and she eventually comes to marry Njordr. So what are we to make of all this? If we look at these three cases, it becomes quite clear that this image of the giants being these big baddies who are meant to fight against the Aesir and destroy the universe isn't quite right. The story is a little bit different, and it's a little more complicated, and what are we, as modern practitioners, supposed to do with that? We need a way of making sense of this idea that a Jotun is a thing that consumes, and the idea that the Jotun are able to move up the chain and marry into the Aesir. And I think we need to look to some of our Eastern religions, our sister religions, in order to make sense of this. We see this idea in Buddhism. I don't know why I said it like that. We see this idea in Buddhism that there are these demon-like figures. I'm not going to try to say them. I will butcher the pronunciation. And there isn't just one. There's an entire taxonomy of these demonic creatures. And I'm saying demonic because I don't have a good English word that I would like to use in order to sort of make sense of this. But they have these demon-like figures that are sort of stuck in samsara like we all are. And they can be saved. They can be brought up. The Jotun can move from Jotunheim and the Uthengard into the Innengard and up to the Aesir. The same way fire can be tamed and can be used to warm the village in times of cold. We can take these figures who are very, very dangerous. They're like primordial sort of chaos beings, and we can try to save them. We can show them some kindness. We can give these things offerings. We can learn to speak their language. We could pray for them, show them some compassion, and ask the Aesir to raise them up, fill them with light, and allow them to move up to the next step in their journey. Now, I know some practitioners are allergic to Eastern religions. They're allergic to anything that has to do with Buddhism or Hinduism. But if you start looking between the religions, you see a lot of parallels. I mean, Buddha got enlightened under a Bodhi tree. Odin hangs underneath a tree to get enlightened. Similar stories, we see these chthonic, demonic beings being raised up in both religions. And if those three cases weren't enough to convince the modern heathen that the Jotun can move up, we can look at Freyr's wife, Gerther. She too was a giantess before marrying Freyr. There again, we have another instance in which the Jotun can actually become Aesir. Now, these are interesting stories that are potentially conveying a worldview of our ancestral religion, but you gotta wonder, what does it really take for a giant to become an Aesir? What does it take to move up? Now, in the cases of Skadi and Gerther, I hope I'm saying that right, we see that it takes a matrimony. It takes union with an Aesir. In the case of Loki, whom I didn't mention earlier, it took a blood oath with Odin himself. And so we have this model of a union with the divine that allows these lower chthonic spirits to join the ranks of the higher realms. Now, this is interesting, especially to me in particular. As you know, I'm a ceremonial magician, which is why I gave myself the title as the arch heretic, the trollman of Wisconsin. I am a theurgist. And what is theurgy if not divine union? So much in the same way that the Jotnar have to come into union with the gods to move up, us too, as men of Midgard, have to perform acts to move into union with the gods. Of course, these acts won't exactly look like a blood oath or marriage, or maybe they will depending on what you're doing. That's not what I'm doing. But nonetheless, there still has to be a willingness to surrender to that which is above in order to come into union. That said, much like how our Buddhist brothers and sisters are working really hard to take these beings from the lower realms and raise them up, doing their bodhisattva duties, I think we too, as heathens, should be doing the same. We should go into places that seem to be full of Jotnar, and we should be praying for them. We should be giving them offerings, showing them compassion in order to raise them up as well. I think this is our duty as heathens. And this might make some people uncomfortable. The idea of duty and doing something other than drinking mead and dressing up like Vikings all day really rubs people the wrong way. But the fact is, folks, we have duties. We should be doing more, especially if you're a Vitki, a wise person, a magician, call it whatever you want to. We should have a duty, and we do have a duty, to go into these places to help these lower beings, these hungry ghosts, rise up out of their normal patterns. And this isn't just a supernatural phenomenon. The same spectral baddies we see in the lore, the Jotun, the Draugr, they don't just exist in the external world. They exist in you too. You are filled with Jotun. There are giants of all shapes and sizes playing around in you at all times, and you don't notice them unless you're willing to look. You know, that thing that makes your blood boil, and every time you drop something or when a coworker walks by, that's a fire giant. That thing that makes you go cold when your girlfriend or wife wants to have a serious conversation, that's a frost giant. That constant nagging for more money and power, that's a hungry ghost. All of these things, all of these entities, they exist as much in you as they do in the external world. And you need to show some compassion, and you need to learn to work with and bring up these entities in order to save them, in order to unify yourself. And once you feel more unified, it's now your duty to go out there and to help others do the same. Now, a lot of Viking bros in these spaces are all about fighting and combat, and physical confrontation is easy. The ability to look at yourself, to forgive pieces of yourself, to integrate those things to unify the whole, and then to do that with others, that's hard. That's much harder than throwing a punch or a kick. It's one of the most difficult battles you'll ever be engaged in, and it never stops. It never goes away. And it's our duty to do this. We need to reach Valhalla, right? We need to get to Asgard. We'll pick up your sword and help others fight the good fight. By the way, this isn't a call for being passive, which is a stereotype Buddhists get often, and it's not the case. In fact, there's lots of ways in which sometimes being fierce or wrathful is the right course of action. That is the compassionate thing to do. I just wanted to make that clear in case any heathens sort of heard that and thought that I'm just trying to like pacify the religion. That's not what I'm trying to do at all. But I do think that we have a moral duty to reduce suffering to a large degree, if and when we can, and in the right time and place. Well, I think I've sort of ranted and raved enough, And so there's an actual question I want to leave you with. And I don't want it to be, well, how do I defeat chaos? Because if there's one thing we've learned from the stories and the prose that is, you can't actually beat chaos. Loki can't beat Logi. We can't overcome fire itself. We can't overcome frost itself. So rather than trying to conquer the chaos and destroy these things, the question is, what oath do you need to make with the parts of yourself you've been calling monsters? What do you need to do to let them sit at your table rather than pounding at the gates? And most importantly, what can you do to help others do the same? And what can you do to maybe redeem a Jotun, to help it see the light, to help it move up? If you guys like what I do here, please leave a like and a comment. Share this to your friends. I'm Robert Knox. This is the Heretical Heathen Podcast. I'll see you guys next time.